Three, two, one, rolling.
Hello and welcome to this very special and momentous discussion, which we are all looking forward to. It's a one-off interview with a Goan boy from Sharda Mandir, TB Kunya, Goa College of Architecture, who's on one of his visits back after firmly establishing his intellectual and professional footprint across the world, but mainly in the United States. Mr. Vinayak Bharne, thank you so much for giving time and welcome to this discussion in the Herald. Vinayak, for the uninitiated, is an urbanist and he will tell us what that actually means. But he's an adjunct professor of urbanism in the School of Architecture in UCS and USC, University of Southern California. And apart from this, he has extensively worked with local governments, municipalities, bigger city governments, and in addition to that, there's been a plethora of books and writing and teaching assignments and so on and so forth. But we'll hear all that from him. But to start with, Vinayak, if you can just tell us what does urbanist mean?
Okay, so the built environment, it consists of many disciplines that shape it. Some shape the physical aspects of built environments, some shape the invisible. For example, you take a city is shaped physically by professionals like architects who make buildings, landscape architects who make open spaces, civil engineers who make infrastructure, etc., etc. And then you have the invisible side of city making, which is shaped by administrators, policymakers, politicians, etc. Now, all of these have a crucial role to play in what cities are. But there is no singular discipline that ties them together. So what has happened over the last century is these disciplines have become increasingly over-specialized and therefore increasingly divorced. So architects work only on buildings and usually don't have knowledge of the rest of the things. Landscape architects work on open space, and the result is a kind of a cacophony. At its worst is what we call sprawl in many parts of the world, including India. Sprawl happens in different ways, and the worst part about it is that the policies that now perpetrate this kind of development allows it on a legal basis and on a formal basis. So urbanism or urban design is a discipline that has been there for a long time, but I like to use the word urbanism, not urban design, because it's not necessarily only about design.
Right.
It's a much broader discipline that is a bridge between all of these allied fields that make cities. So as an urbanist, you have to know a little bit of what everyone does. So the analogy I usually make is, if architecture is a violin player and landscape architecture a cello player, and a civil engineer is a tabla player and a politician is a flute player, an urbanist is a maestro that really takes the whole orchestra and makes sure that it's adhering to a common vision, which we call the city.
But tell me, is it a relatively new like a new approach to looking at urban planning, or was it always there and you caught onto it, or is it something which is still very nascent in terms of its outreach and so on and so forth?
Not at all. I mean, city planning and urbanism has been there always. I mean, cities have been around for the longest time. The approach that we have given to making cities has changed over time because we keep learning new things. Issues change, the challenges change, and city making responds to all this constantly. For instance, in the pre-war era, pre-World War II era, cities were made a particular way. If you look at the pre-industrial era, cities were made a particular way. You didn't have cars, so cities were compact. It's as simple as that. You didn't have industries that generated toxic fumes, so you could live and work in the same place.
Right.
With the industrial era, a lot of things changed, as we know. Toxic fumes meant you had to live far away. The car became a fascination. So living areas were separated from work areas.
Yes,
and so freeways began to come up, large infrastructure began to come up. Now at that point, we didn't really understand the repercussions of what this meant. We thought life would be good, and obviously. But 60 years down the line, we know that these have created huge debacles. I mean, we have climate change, socioeconomic polarizations, all these kind of things have happened. So the disciplines have now reinvented themselves. So while urbanism has been around for a long time, the trends of urbanism in the 1920s and 30s was significantly different than the trends of urbanism that we are trying to do. And what we are trying to do today is reverse these debacles. So we are trying to make cities more walkable. We're trying to discourage people from driving cars. We're trying to decrease dependence on fossil fuels. We're trying to make sure local food production is there. We're trying to make cities healthier. We're trying to cater to the senior citizens. We're trying to preserve historic fabrics, which in the modern era were devastated all across the world. So the point is, while it's been around, the focus has changed depending on, number one, the identification of debacles, and number two, the crises that we face, such as climate change, etc.
The another thing, I mean, I'm also was fascinated by this example of you saying that there'll be a cello player and there'll be a tabla player and they all meet together and then there's a maestro. Do you also feel that even within the city spaces, there should be dedicated spaces for walking, for driving, for bus routes, and so on and so forth? Because what is happening in India, and especially in a place like Goa, is that our city landscape or urban landscape does not really cater to defining proper spaces for all kinds of commuters to live and coexist. Has it been a challenge with planning in India as opposed to what's happening in the West?
Well, I think the best way to answer that question is if you take a simple element in a city like a street.
Right.
And that's an important one. My latest book is on streets. It's called Streets for All.
Yes.
Now, if you take a street is a space in the city, a public space in the city, where we spend almost 80% of our public life.
Right.
You may hang out in a park once in a while, but we all walk on streets. Now, that means that the street has to be inclusive. It has to cater to moving cars, buses, public transportation, maybe even animals, trees, ecology, senior citizens, handicapped people, children. So how you bring these issues in and how you design streets is really what it's all about. What the book talks about, which I think is relevant to this question, is as you move across the world, while the goals of making inclusive streets and great streets are the same, the means through which they are done have to change. Because cities across the world don't have the same governance, they don't have the same stringency, they don't have the same accountability, they don't have the same reinforcement. And these are realities that you have to acknowledge. So while the theory of making inclusive cities inclusive, yes, we want to bring everyone in, is the same. How you get there changes. So I think the challenge in India, there have been wonderful projects that have been done across India, some of which we published in the book, that show the success stories of what this means.
Could you highlight some of those?
Well, of course. For instance, there are beautiful projects that have been done in Ahmedabad. Just streetscapes that bring in public transit. There is the Nomozo that was done in Goa. We have a paper on the Nomozo in Goa.
Right.
There are some brilliant examples in Central America where streets flex and become malleable. So at some point they are meant only for cars and people, and then other points they're meant only for people.
Right.
Ciclovia and all these things. I think these are very well known across the world now. But in Goa, I think we've not yet tried one of these pilot projects on a serious basis.
Right.
What we've discovered, particularly in places like Goa, where there's a limited amount of streets, so you take a place like Panjim, which is a grid, and it has limited streets.
Right.
Right. And I get very concerned when I hear sort of misconceptions that if you pedestrianize these streets, or just statements that are made, that we have to realize that there's anytime you pedestrianize anything permanently, you're limiting its use.
That's right, correct.
So streets are meant for multiple coexistence. That's only streets. I could say the same for parks. I could say the same for other spaces. So the eventual goal, to answer your question, is yes, we are trying to make cities for everyone. But how we're going to get there is going to be different.
Okay, I'll come back to this question a little later. I was particularly interested in one piece of information that I had about your work, is how you transform the Lancaster Boulevard. And this was in California, right?
That's correct.
Right, correct. If you could just tell us a little bit about that experience, because I believe it was pretty overwhelming in how you transformed the whole, the neighborhood transformed because of the street, I think.
Yeah. So this is clearly one of the more memorable projects of my career, at least. And basically, this is a modest city in California. This is not a huge, affluent city or anything. A modest city, and it's a desert city, which means that it has the additional challenge of just being in a very hot place.
Right.
So water is a big issue, heat is a big issue. And this was during 2010, which was the economic downturn in the United States. So they didn't have much money. And they had just secured a grant. I think it was about $8 million or something around that line, $8 to $14 million, somewhere there.
Right.
And we were brought in after the decision had been made that they needed to invest that money in their downtown. Now, what was fascinating is this was a historic street where for 3 or 4 generations, multiple people had lived in local bakeries and all kinds of things.
Right.
And like it had happened in other places in the US, this street had been widened to 6 lanes of traffic, which was way too vast for the amount of traffic. So what I always like to tell, say on record is, before we were brought in, the city, the municipality, went on a massive outreach effort. This is very important.
Okay.
So they got all the business owners on the street and they told them what their intention was, what their vision was. There was excitement, there was opposition, there was dialogue. Eventually everyone agreed that investing in the street would be a good thing.
Right.
So that's very important, because you can't just go there as a designer.
And the
start
city government did
bombarding.
that.
Yeah, the municipality, the municipal officials
Right.
went on a 6-month campaign and did that. After they knew that there was enough support for this project, they brought us in as the designers, which is a team, of course. And what we did is we kept the sidewalks, because breaking sidewalks is very expensive. We kept the parking on both sides of the street, because parking is valuable. We took the central 3 lanes, put pervious paving, so desert, so water can actually go into the ground, kept 1 lane of asphalt on both sides, parked the central lanes as an angled parking, so you increase the parking, which is essential. Even in a place like Goa, you need it. But then that flexible space on a Thursday or a Friday or a Saturday, you can remove the cars and you can make it a pedestrian-only zone. And we planted double row of trees for 1 mile, so it creates shade. And it was a very simple project, low, just modest budget. But what happened is, this is also what I like to say, when we finished all the construction documents, the city took that and constructed it in 8 months.
Right.
Now that is
right.
not a small thing, and I should not be taking, we cannot take credit for it. It's the city. So what they did is they hired a team. I'm told that all the employees were from the city itself at that time. And they did it in increments of 3, 4, and 3. Because every time you construct a massive street, there's disruption to the businesses, so you have to do it.
Right. Right.
Where the success story came in is, in as less as 3 years, the place, it's called The Boulevard. In as less as 3 years, the place had become so iconic that developers from neighboring cities and elsewhere now wanted to build on this boulevard, because land prices had gone up, affordable housing projects came in. And while the city invested $14 million, in 3 years it brought back $300 million of economic investment. So what I always like, the most important lesson for us, for many of us, was that investing in streetscapes, investing in street enhancements, open space enhancement is not a beautification. This is
Right,
the biggest
right.
problem. We think of them as beautification projects. That word should be thrown away. These projects are economic investments, and you have to get return on economic investment. You have to think of it as a financial strategy, which also has brilliant social repercussions.
A big takeaway from what you're saying, just to interrupt, is that, see, there was a lot of stakeholder engagement. People were involved, and the local people bought into it. That's extremely important. It was not a top-down approach, and I think that's a very important takeaway, because often what happens is a lot of projects don't take off because the approach is different.
That's correct. But, just to be honest with you, it could have gone the other way too.
It could have, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's a success story, which is why we're talking about it. But public outreach is imperative to any project, particularly in Goa and India. I think the more transparent we can be with the stakeholders, the better projects will become, because then everyone is an author in the project.
Right. There's one underlying narrative of yours where you said on several occasions that I'd rather do stuff like this, improve streets, rewrite FSI zone rules, and so on and so forth, rather than build cool buildings. And the issue is, does that also come from this inherent nature or the need to give back, rather than just only gain as an architect? In the sense that does it also stem from the culture that you've been brought up in, the value systems that you have? Because what happens is, this is a kind of a narrative or a tone one doesn't really hear from architects. Let's put it this way.
Well, I think you don't hear it particularly in Goa and other places, because I think the system doesn't allow them to do it. I think there are so many architects in Goa that would be happy to do these kind of projects. I mean, many of them are my friends. I mean, they know everything I know and more. They're 10 times more talented than I am, I would argue. So I think that the knowledge and the know-how is all there, but you need backing. You need some engine to drive you there. So I think that's one. On a personal level, I would still love to make cool buildings if I was that talented. But the only realization that came to me as I grew up in the world of architecture was that buildings alone
Right.
don't make cities.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to get at, that you can't limit yourself as an architect
To
to
just
buildings.
buildings,
That's that's the mistake. An architect should be able to do every aspect of the built environment.
I'll just read from some quotes of yours. I think this is from an interview that you gave to Business Goa. I'll just read it and then I'll ask you a question. There are two issues I see. I'm quoting you now. One is that there is no robust planning and urban design agenda. You were referring to Goa here. Or even knowledge. A beautiful place like Goa needs this urgently. Otherwise, you'll get a bunch of cool buildings thrown here and there without amounting to anything. The other problem is the petrified administrative system and bylaws within which all Goan architects have to work. So even if they have the right intentions about urban design, conservation, etc., the system does not let them go too far. So what I've learnt is that in Goa, architectural talent is as much about design as it is about knowing how to navigate the administrative ecosystem. Some Goan architects are great at design and so on and so forth. But this is basically the gist of
I
what you
remember
said.
that, yeah.
Yes. So if you could just kind of give your updated thoughts on this.
Sure. I mean, it's not just about Goa. It's happening all over the world in many places. So, Goa is one of these cases. So I've always maintained that there is no shortage of architectural talent in Goa. I mean, I will continue to say that on record. I think
Right.
Goa has some wonderful architects and they're doing beautiful work. I know many of them and I'm very proud to know many of them.
Right.
The issue is, if you look at so let me say it this way. The beauty of Goa is that it is not metropolitan. Goa does not have a city.
Right.
It doesn't have one, and and thank God, and hopefully it should never have one. Goa is
You're so right, because I get sometimes very irked when people talk about Goa as a city. I mean, they refer to Goa as a city.
No, there is no city in
Yes,
Goa.
yes,
I think
yes.
Goa is a collection, an ensemble of towns and villages with beautiful ecology in the middle of it. That's it, and I hope it never changes. Panjim is a town. So if you look at the way Panjim was designed, and we have, even pre-Portuguese or even during the Portuguese rule, Panjim, Vasco and a few other cities were built from scratch. I believe Vasco was built from scratch too, but Panjim certainly was a built from scratch 17th century city. And if you look at how it was designed, Vasco Pinho in his book elaborates on it very beautifully. I forget
Yes.
the name of the book, but at the end of the book he gives a sort of typological system that they had about, ruas, largos, avenidas. So there was a system of elements
Right.
that were rules on how you were supposed to make this town. And before the modern era kicked in Goa, you could see the beauty. I was in Kampala today morning opposite Kala Academy, and that little fragment where there's a park, and
Sure,
when you
sure.
can see how intelligent and how simple these kind of things are. You can go to Fontainhas and see it. So there was the idea of open space, and there was the idea of fabric, and there was the idea of continuity, and all these kind of things. Now the rupture happened during the first generation because Goan architects were trained in the modern era, where you were taught to create conscious ruptures.
Right,
So
right.
I'm talking of modern buildings that erupted in the middle of Panjim. That it's not the question of height or scale. That had to happen. But there was a rupture. You were creating idioms and languages and
Right,
everything. They were
right.
completely different, which
Right.
is okay in the middle of the city. But it's not okay in historic districts. But it happened. In the most sensitive areas, you find buildings that
That's so
have
true.
nothing
Correct.
to do with it.
Yes,
So,
yes, yes.
so where I'm going with this is the key point of your question is to elaborate on what I said. So I think that if you want to bring back urban design, which is about buildings not making themselves, but making things together. Why is a street in Fontainhas a beautiful street when you go through? Because the rules wanted you to make a street wall. Because the rules wanted scales that were similar.
Right.
These are not accidents.
Right,
None
right.
of this is an accident. They were consciously thought
Right,
about.
yes, yes.
If we don't think of it this way for our time, we're not going to have any urban design. So what I mean is, the missing link in Goa, for me, is very clear. You have planning, which is all about policy and FSI and zoning. But it's policy. It has nothing to do with physical form. The planners in Goa are not trained in physical form. And then you have architects who work on individual sites. There is nothing in the middle. No rules, no regulations, no policy, nothing that link these two. And I feel that if there's any place that deserves it, it is Goa, because
Right.
Goa had a tremendous repository of urban design. You can even see it with all the damage that has been done. You can still see the fragments.
Of course.
It's really quite amazing.
It jumps out from everywhere.
It jumps
actually,
out.
yes.
So that was one. And then, what I admire about Goan architects is in the small ecology of Goa, it's not a vast ecology, you have to be very talented to negotiate project entitlements, developer pressures. I mean, this is not easy.
Sure,
I have a lot
right.
of admiration for how my friends do that.
Yeah, that navigation is tough.
Of course it is, and it is part of our field. So you have to work within the realities of what that means. So design is one thing, but how you navigate all these administrative processes is another. And I would say this again and again. I think we have to bring an urban design agenda to Goa because the time is now. If you don't do this now, I think.
Also, I think it's extremely important that political parties and governments and others they are made to feel that this is an important enough agenda. And I think the pressure and the push should come from the people because at this point of time this mandate is going to be put on the table only if there are enough people talking about it. And I think there are more and more people who speak about urban rejuvenation, urban planning, and stuff like this.
I think it is happening now.
Yeah?
I think
Okay.
there's. As I said before, thank God I'm not the only one speaking like this.
Right,
I don't want to be the only one speaking
Right,
like this.
right.
There are at least 100 people. Whatever they are, number. But there are a lot of people that know exactly what I'm talking about, and they may be able to articulate it much better than me. I think that the only point I'll make is we can't think of introducing or bringing in urban design as an ideological thing.
Right,
Because that's
right.
never going to work. I mean, it's all good, but that's theory. We have to bring it in as an economic engine. That, investing in rules and regulations to make places that are cogent, that are clear, that are beautiful, that have sidewalks, that cater to senior citizens, where you can hang out in the evening, is about economic development, that it can raise the prosperity index of our cities. Tourists will want to come in. People will want to pay more. People will want to, it just
Right,
goes on.
right.
But it has to have an incentive. It cannot just be a ideological principle.
I'd just like to draw your attention, we are running out of time, but a quick question. To the heritage ecosystem, what happens is there's a lot that Goa needs to do to conserve and preserve its heritage. And our heritage is constantly under threat, I mean, in the sense that in a formal way or in an indirect way. And, major heritage spaces like the old Goa precinct and the heritage precinct there, or even if you look at Fontainebleau, for instance, you look at so many heritage buildings that are crumbling and not being taken. I think one of the reasons why this is probably happening, according to me, is also because heritage conservation should not be seen in isolation. It has to be dovetailed and woven into your entire urban planning, don't you think?
Well, there are three aspects. So one of my books is on global heritage conservation. The process of writing it,
I know.
talking about-
I asked you this question because
Yeah, I mean, and believe me, I don't
Yes.
write books because I know
Yes.
something. I write them because I
Yes.
don't know. The
Right.
process of writing or
Right.
making one
Right.
teaches you a
Right.
lot.
Right.
So what we found is that heritage, just to be simple about it, has three aspects. So there is natural heritage. That's the number one thing in Goa. I mean, Goa has such incredible natural heritage, Khazan lands, the mangroves, the creeks. That's number one.
Right.
If we
Right.
can't take care of that, I don't know what we're doing. So that's number one. Number two, you have built heritage, which is important because that's a legacy that's about reuse, about not wasting what we have. It's also ties us back to our history, etc. But the critical question is, why invest in heritage if it is only for a select few? This is a critical question the book asks. If all we are doing is taking buildings, making them pretty, and only a select few can enjoy them, that's one thing. But if you can now think of heritage conservation as a social experiment where you invest in a place, you pour money in a place, but it's helping a lot of people. It really changes the index of the place. It creates a social renaissance. It creates an economic renaissance. So there are many ways of thinking of heritage conservation. What I'm trying to get at is thinking of heritage one building at a time is one thing. Thinking of heritage as districts, as places, as cities, as streets is another. And the last thing I'll say in heritage is we can never ignore intangible heritage. So, the greatest thing that has happened in Goa is that there are a number of wonderful scholars, I won't take names here, but I know many of them, who have made a concerted campaign of writing about the potters of Goa,
Yes, that's
the
true.
foods of Goa,
Correct.
the dances of Goa,
Yes.
the clothing of Goa.
Yes.
I mean,
that's heritage too.
of course, I mean,
Yes.
it's not two, it is heritage. Because what is the point of preserving historic fabrics if the legacies of these people go away. So I think we need to change our perspective of what heritage means. And for me, the crucial question is invest in heritage in a way that is beneficial for a much greater good than just your little project. But in order to enable people to do this, you need a system. So again, the rules, the incentives need to change. And I think that's what it's a very exciting time, because we need to talk about these things. Citizens are now waking up to these ideas, and I think this collective dialogue will hopefully show some real movement.
I'll now come to my last question. I'll end with your work as an editor for My Livable City, right?
Yes.
That's a quarterly book that you magazine
Yes.
or periodical that you bring out. Could you tell us a little bit about this, because it's a very specific niche publication? And,
Right. So
and what's your role there?
So all of us in some form or the other think we all do everything.
Sure.
In the academy, when you're a professor, you write so-called mighty things, but they are read by not even 1% of the population.
Right.
And it always occurred to some of us that while that's all good, if you take a magazine like National Geographic, what National Geographic has been able to do so beautifully is bring the issue of the wild and the natural to every home. So it's like David Attenborough, one of my heroes. You know, what he has done in his 95-year-old life is he's brought knowledge of the importance of biology, zoology, animals, wild, biomes, into the lives of every home. So
Right.
it's like every citizen has to have a stake in understanding how important this is for our future. And we felt that the same needs to happen for cities, because if there's this misconception that environmental conservation should be left to biologists, they're doing it.
Right.
Architects are here to make some cool stuff. I think that's ridiculous. If you think about what's creating climate change right now, urbanization is on top of the list. We are the field that has the ability to stop the destructive trends of urbanization. So the more horrible our urbanization gets, the more horrible climate change becomes. So if our profession comes together and talks about how to conserve the environment from the other side, stop the growth of cities, stop sprawl, talk about infill, talk about compact footprints, we have a great role to play along with the environmentalists in talking about the future of the environment. So in order to sort of get all this, we launched an organization. It was founded by two people, one from the Netherlands and one from Mumbai, and then I was brought in a year later. And it's a knowledge platform and a think tank. And what we do is we organize executive courses every year in Netherlands, and we bring out previously a quarterly magazine, now a biannual, twice a year. And it's a beautiful colored magazine that essentially positions itself like National Geographic in being erudite but not over the top, so that it's an approachable way for people to understand that cities matter. And every issue is themed. So our latest issue was called Health in the City. We've done issues on water, all kinds of things.
Right.
And we solicit articles. We get articles from various people. Wonderful people have contributed for it.
And it's available online as well.
Of course it is. Yeah, you can go to the website. So it's a way of saying, our hope is that this will grow, and our hope is many others will happen, but we need to bring the agenda of cities to every home, that if citizens don't have a concerted effort in making sure that they have a stake in the city, and that matters, I don't think we're getting very far.
Vinayak Bhade, thank you so much for giving us this time and your insights. We could have gone on for half an hour or even longer, but the last half an hour has been absolutely riveting and has given us a lot of insights and things to ponder. And we just hope that one day, your dream of coming and doing a project in Goa, which you said you think about almost every day, materializes. And it's great to have Goan talent doing so well internationally. And we hope and pray that someday you'll be able to come back and do something for our cities as well in Goa, your homeland. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.